Hey there, history buffs. Today, we're diving into a fascinating chapter of British history. The English Civil War 1642 to 1651 was a series of conflicts and political struggles between the forces of King Charles I Royalists or Cavaliers and Parliamentarians or Roundheads. This war wasn't just about battles, it was a fight over the governance of England, the power of the monarchy, and the rights of Parliament. The war ultimately led to the trial and execution of a king, the abolition of the monarchy for a time, and the establishment of a republican government under Oliver Cromwell. It is one of the most defining periods in British history, influencing the future of democratic governance. To understand the outbreak of the English Civil War, we must first explore the long-standing tensions that set the stage. Tensions between Crown and Parliament, divine right of kings. King Charles I believed in the divine right of kings, meaning that he thought his authority came directly from God and that he was answerable to no one, including Parliament. Financial struggles. Charles I's need for funds led to his continuous conflicts with Parliament. Unlike other European monarchs, English kings could not raise taxes without Parliament's consent. Charles often dismissed Parliament and attempted to rule without it, especially after 1629, entering what is known as the Personal Rule or the 11 Years' Tyranny. Religious divisions, Puritans versus Anglicans, religious disputes also played a crucial role. Charles I married a Catholic, Queen Henrietta Maria of France, which raised suspicions among his Protestant subjects, especially the Puritans who sought further reform of the Church of England. Imposition of the Anglican Book of Common Prayer in Scotland. In 1637, Charles attempted to impose an Anglican prayer book on Presbyterian Scotland, sparking the bishops' wars and a Scottish rebellion, which drained the crown financially and forced Charles to recall Parliament. The Long Parliament and the Spark of War. When Charles summoned Parliament in 1640 to raise funds for his war with Scotland, tensions reached a breaking point. Parliament sought to curtail his powers, leading to a series of political moves that eventually provoked the king to take action. In 1642, Charles attempted to arrest 5 members of Parliament, which solidified the divide, and both sides began to raise armies. The war begins, key phases and battles. The English Civil War unfolded over 3 distinct phases, with a series of crucial battles and events shaping the outcome. The First English Civil War 164 to 164. Royalist versus Parliamentarian forces. The Royalists, also known as Cavaliers, were largely made up of the nobility, rural landowners, and Anglicans who supported the monarchy. Parliamentarians, or Roundheads, were mostly Puritans, merchants, and middle-class citizens who wanted more power for Parliament. Battle of Edgehill 1642. Battle of Edgehill 1642. The first pitched battle of the war, which ended inconclusively. Battle of Marston Moor 1644, a decisive parliamentarian victory that gave them control of the north of England. This battle saw the rising influence of Oliver Cromwell and his new model army. Battle of Naseby 1645, the turning point of the war, in which the parliamentarian forces, led by Cromwell's cavalry, decisively defeated Charles I's main army. The Second English Civil War 1648. Despite his defeat in the First Civil War, Charles I continued to negotiate and conspire with various factions, including the Scots. In 1648, Royalist uprisings broke out, but the new model army quickly crushed them. This phase of the war ended with Charles I's capture, leading to a radical turn of events. The Third English Civil War 1649–1651. After Charles I's execution in 1649, the conflict continued with Charles II, the king's son, attempting to regain the throne. Supported by the Scots, Charles II led a royalist force against Parliament. Battle of Worcester 1651. This was the final battle of the war, where Cromwell decisively defeated the royalist army, forcing Charles II into exile in France. The New Model Army and Oliver Cromwell. The success of the Parliamentarians was largely due to the New Model Army, a professional, disciplined force created by Parliament in 1645. Formation and impact. Oliver Cromwell. Cromwell was instrumental in shaping the New Model Army and rose to prominence during the conflict. His military leadership was key to Parliament's victories in battles like Marston Moor and Naseby. Merit-based promotion. Unlike royalist forces, where aristocratic birth often dictated command, the New Model Army promoted officers based on merit and religious zeal, making it a highly effective fighting force. Political influence. As the war progressed, the New Model Army became more than just a military force. It began to assert political influence, especially after Charles I's capture. The army pushed for more radical solutions to the political crisis, leading to the trial and execution of the king in January 1649. The execution of King Charles I 1649. One of the most shocking outcomes of the English Civil War was the trial and execution of Charles I. The trial of the king. In 1649, Parliament put Charles I on trial for high treason. The decision to try the king was unprecedented and controversial. Charles refused to recognize the court's authority, insisting that no court had the right to judge a monarch. Execution. Despite his protests, Charles was found guilty and sentenced to death. On January 30, 1649, he was executed outside the Banqueting House in Whitehall, London. His death sent shockwaves across Europe, as it was the first time a reigning king had been publicly tried and executed by his own people. The Interregnum and the Commonwealth 1649 to 1660. Of Charles I's execution, England entered a period known as the Interregnum, where the monarchy was abolished and a republican government known as the Commonwealth was established. Oliver Cromwell and the Protectorate. In 1653, after several years of political instability, Oliver Cromwell assumed power as Lord Protector under a military dictatorship. Although Cromwell tried to rule with Parliament, he found it difficult to manage the competing factions, and his rule became increasingly authoritarian. Religious reforms and policies. Cromwell's government implemented strict Puritan religious reforms, which included closing theaters, banning Christmas celebrations, and enforcing moral discipline. His policies, while supported by some, alienated many, particularly the Royalists and moderate Protestants. Wars in Ireland and Scotland. Cromwell also led brutal military campaigns in Ireland 1649 to 1650 and Scotland 1650 to 1651 to subdue Royalist uprisings. His actions in Ireland, particularly the massacres at Drogheda and Wexford, have been deeply controversial, with many viewing them as acts of cruelty. The restoration of the monarchy 1660. Cromwell died in 1658, and his son, Richard Cromwell, briefly succeeded him. However, Richard lacked his father's authority and military backing, leading to political chaos. The return of Charles II. By 1660, the English people had grown tired of military rule and longed for stability. Parliament invited Charles II, the son of Charles I, to return from exile and restore the monarchy. This event is known as the Restoration. Charles II returned to England on May 29, 1660, and was crowned king, marking the end of the Republican experiment and the resumption of monarchical rule. However, the relationship between the monarchy and Parliament had been permanently altered by the events of the Civil War. Legacy of the English Civil War. The English Civil War had profound and lasting effects on the British Isles and the broader development of constitutional governance. The role of Parliament. One of the most important legacies of the war was the recognition of Parliament's authority over the monarchy. Although the monarchy was restored, Parliament had gained considerable power, particularly in matters of taxation and governance. This paved the way for constitutional monarchy in England, especially after the Glorious Revolution of 1688. Influence on democracy. The English Civil War laid the foundations for many democratic principles that would later be adopted by other nations. particularly the idea that the authority of the ruler should be subject to the rule of law and the will of the people, represented through Parliament. Religious tolerance.
While the war itself was partly driven by religious conflict, it led to a growing recognition of the need for religious tolerance in England. The Puritan experiment under Cromwell ultimately failed, and by the time of the Restoration, there was a greater emphasis on moderation and compromise in religious matters. The English Civil War was not just a clash of armies, but a conflict over the very nature of governance and power in England. It set into motion changes that would shape the political landscape of Britain for centuries, reinforcing the authority of Parliament and curtailing the absolute power of the monarchy. The execution of Charles I and the brief experiment with Republican government. Thanks for joining us on this historical journey. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more fascinating historical insights. Until next time, stay curious.